Welcome to the setup analysis of the Volkl Organix V1 oversized, and in the racket we have it strung up with Signum Pro Firestorm 1.30. So I'll do the usual. I'll go through some of the negatives, some of the positives I took away from my practice matches, and we'll go from there, see if we can make any improvements. This is going to be part one of a two-part series. So we'll get into how the setup performed while the strings were pretty much brand new, and then in part two, after probably about 8 to 10 hours of play, we'll do a second review and then see if the playing characteristics changed all that much. Right, onto the weaknesses I experienced during the first couple of practice sets or practice matches that I played. And this is something I probably haven't mentioned before in setups because it hasn't come across as an issue so far, but the launch angle of this setup was a lot lower in comparison to the Organix SV Lite racket that we were using. And because length control at the moment isn't too much of an issue, I was able to swing out with quite a bit of aggression and not fear the ball going long. I actually missed the higher launch angle that I got from the Organix racket, because that higher launch angle gave me easier access to different heights over the net, and so I could use that as a weapon. Whereas with this racket, the Volkl, I was having to play a little bit lower over the net naturally because the setup demanded it, and if I wanted to play with a bit more height over the net and try and use that as a strategy, it took a lot more effort, and in fact it was easier to do so when I was standing a lot further behind the baseline and I had time to wind up. If I didn't have time, then using height over the net was just not an option. The setup didn't really allow it unless I really put effort into getting the stroke underneath the ball and sending it a few foot higher than usual over the net. So that was an interesting negative. It's probably player specific. Some players will use this setup and really like the consistent low trajectory that the racket and the stringing combination provide the user. But for me personally, I like to use height as a weapon. I like to use a lot of variety to throw my opponents off rhythm, because I don't possess that innate power that a lot of the taller, heavier players do. So I've got to use a bit of guile, use strategy more often, and unfortunately one of my strategies is blocked off. I don't have access to it as easily as I would with our previous setup. Onto other negatives. In our preview, we highlighted the shot speed at 65.8 miles an hour for this racket as a potential issue. And with the strings brand new, I didn't feel as if the length control was an issue. I was quite aggressive from the start of this practice match, and never really found that if I got the correct technique going, that control of the length of my shots was ever an issue. But perhaps I'm being a little bit spoiled here when I say I would like a little bit more in terms of length control, so I could step inside the court with more ease, and I especially want to start using my second serve return as an opportunity to get on the front foot straight away. Hitting winners or forced errors off of that shot is something I very rarely do. I usually just try and neutralize, which is a decent option against bigger second serves, but to not have the ability or access to a shot that would get me onto the front foot straight away, I think is something that needs working on, and it's definitely an area for improvement. So I'd like even a bit more length control, and so we're going to look at that in the future as well. The conditions, a little word on that. It was very windy during this set, but despite the lightness of the racket, I felt like the setup dealt with the instability that wind can cause pretty well. A lot better than other previous setups have, especially rackets that are even lighter than this. And so I guess the extra flex and higher vibration frequency do help in terms of stability in difficult windy conditions. And while we're on the subject of stability, looking at that swing weight again, which was a little bit lower than our previous racket, it was 306 compared to the SV Lite, which was higher at 310. I felt like the Volkl did pretty well in terms of plow through against our opponent's strokes. And I did mention the swing weight in the preview, that we might have a little bit of an issue with the length control because a lower swing weight tends to launch the ball a little bit further. There's a few other aspects of it, but just in general, there's less length control, all things being equal. But then I'm not too enthusiastic about the idea of adding weight to the head of the racket. We might have a bit more control on the ground strokes, but I feel like the rest of our game, the serves, the touch, the volleys, they could suffer because of the extra shot speed giving us less length control, and therefore our ability to attack from within the baseline diminishes a bit. So I'm apprehensive, and it's not something I'm going to do to this setup. Anyway, let's move on to some of the strengths of this racket. And I mentioned before in the preview, the swing speed was one of the stats that attracted me to this racket in the first place, because it's a slight increase to 50.2 miles an hour in comparison to our previous 50.1. Small differences, but a difference nonetheless, and I will take any advantage I can get. I felt like even though it was a tiny difference, my serve was a lot more effective, especially the second serve. I actually felt like I could hit out without fear of double faulting. In fact, it got to the point where I had enough confidence in the setup that I could go closer to the line, and that's something I very rarely feel with any setup really. So especially on second serves, I'm usually very conservative. I don't want to double fault and give my opponent a 3 point, but because I was hitting out on the second with quite a lot of placement accuracy, I was going closer to the line with a lot more racket head speed, obviously helped by the quicker swing speed of this racket in the first place. So that was a welcome addition to my game. An attacking second serve, something that I think I've mentioned it quite a few times before. I want to be able to start off on the front foot more on that second serve, and this setup definitely was a step in the right direction. The first serve I felt was solid as usual, not quite as big as of an improvement as the second serve, but still that percentage is in the mid-50s. I'm able to go closer to the lines again, and the length control wasn't too bad, so I could hit out on the first serve, much more so than I have in the previous few setups, and especially with the synthetic gut strings, where I was just placing the serve, both serves, the first and the second. With this string, I am actually ramping up the pace as much as I can, probably like 85 to 90%, because if I start redlining my game, I get tired even before the rally begins. So yeah, the serve was a good improvement, and I was happy with the way that it performed in that regard. Right, that is going to bring us to the end of this setup analysis, part 1 anyway. Part 2 will be coming out soon, so stay tuned for that if you found this interesting. A quick recap of what we went through in this video. The weaknesses were a little subjective. I did not enjoy the lower launch angle because it blocked my access to some of the strategies I use in terms of using different heights over the net as a variety tool against my opponents, and as a straight up weapon when I'm looking to use bounce to throw off my opponent's rhythm. So I didn't enjoy the lower launch angle, and looking to try and fix something like that is difficult, because obviously as we increase the launch angle, we increase the potential for less length control as well. So that's something we're going to have to be very careful with, but it's an issue I've definitely noted and want to work on. Also, I wouldn't say this was a weakness. I thought the length control was quite good, but I want access to an aggressive return, especially off my opponent's second serve, and this doesn't give me the ability to do so consistently. And even on the ground strokes inside the baseline, I didn't feel like I could hit out as aggressively as I could with our previous setup, which was the Organix SV Lite. And so those are the two weaknesses. They weren't mega weaknesses like we've identified in previous setups. They were just weaknesses relative to what I'm looking to get out of the setup. So the decrease in the launch angle being too much for my liking, and the length control could be further improved as well. The strength that I highlighted in this video was the serve, both the first and especially the second serve, the kick serve in particular. In fact, that was the only serve I used in both of these practice matches. I thought it was, in comparison to previous setups, outstanding. And I actually felt like it was a weapon at times where I could go close to the lines and aim to get 3 points off of the second serve, which I don't think I've ever said is an option. It wasn't something I could consistently do, but I definitely felt like I had access to an aggressive second serve that would at least allow me to be on the front foot from the start of the rally. And the first serve as well, I was able to hit out with decent pace and know and have the confidence that the length control was there, that if I got the correct time and the correct technique, that I was going to be able to hit those spots with reasonable accuracy. So I'm happy with my first serve percentage. I'm definitely happy with the improvement in the kick serve, and so we're heading in the right direction in that department. So yeah, that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank you all for watching, and if you did enjoy it, it might be worth checking out the other content on this channel and staying tuned for the part 2 of this setup analysis that's coming out soon as well. So hopefully I'm going to see you all there, and until then, everyone, take care.